Hello, my name's Nigel Thorne. I have concerns about elements of the RSE guidance and code and the potential impact on the psychology of young people. In June 2023, I wrote to Jeremy Miles. Dear Mr. Miles, I am writing to express my concerns regarding the RSE code and guidance provided for schools. You'll be aware that schools have a legal obligation to provide teaching that is objective, critical and pluralistic as specified in the RSE Guidance and Code Consultation document. You may be aware that there is something of a controversy about the teaching of gender. In the previous PSE framework, Personal and Social Education Framework for 7 to 19-year-olds in Wales, there is a reference to the word gender that is quite clearly being used as a synonym for sex, where it states, the Equal Opportunities legislation, which covers age, disability, gender, race, religion and belief, and sexual orientation, further places a duty on learning providers in Wales towards present and prospective learners to eliminate discrimination and harassment, to promote positive attitudes and equal opportunities, and to encourage participation. At that time, the Equal Opportunities legislation included the Sex Discrimination Act of 1975, which made no reference to the word gender. In the Oxford English Dictionary, the definition of gender states males or females viewed as a group equals sex. In the 20th century, as sex came increasingly to mean sexual intercourse, gender began to replace it as the usual word for the biological grouping of males and females. In the cross-cutting themes for designing your curriculum page on the Hub website, there is a new definition of gender, which is often used to refer to whether someone identifies as female, male, or non-binary. In this definition, the word gender is clearly not a synonym for sex. If schools teach as fact the belief that gender is how we feel about ourselves, then this will be a contravention of the objective, critical and pluralistic requirement. I ask two questions. 1. What steps are you taking to ensure that schools do not engage the services of outside organisations who teach ideas that are in contravention of the objective, critical and pluralistic requirement? 2. Given the RSE code itself is flawed, what provision are you putting in place to ensure the traditional understanding of the meaning of the word gender as a synonym for sex can be expressed without fear of condemnation? On the 29th of June, I received a reply to a question I didn't ask. Thank you for your email of 7th of June to the Minister for Education and Welsh Language about the use of gender within the Relationships and Sexuality Education Code. I've been asked to reply. You may be aware that the RSE Code has been the subject of a recent legal challenge by way of a judicial review before the High Court, Isherwood versus Welsh Ministers, where the court found in favour of the Welsh Government. As to the matter of gender, Lady Justice Stein agreed with the Welsh ministers that it is an incontrovertible fact and it is recognised by a substantial body of reputable organisations that there are persons who self-identify in a gender that is different to their biological sex at birth, and there are persons who self-identify as T, Q or plus. And for many such persons, this constitutes an important and often fundamental part of their identity. It cannot be incompatible with A2P1 of the ECHR to teach children that such persons exist and that they should be treated equally and with respect. Such teaching is entirely aligned with the pluralism requirement. It is perfectly lawful to recognise in the RSE Code that sex and gender are separate matters. It is indeed an incontrovertible fact that there are persons who self-identify as a different gender. Young people learn this on social media. They learn this in school. The main architect of the RSE curriculum is Professor Emma Renold from Cardiff University.
And over the last 3 years, we've been sharing this creative praxis in an innovative professional learning programme for teachers in Wales who are preparing for the new Statutory Relationships and Sexuality Education curriculum, a curriculum which I continue to have the privilege to inform and shape.
Professor Renold delivers training for teachers in the Central South Consortium, which covers teachers in the local authority areas of Cardiff, Bridgend, Vale of Glamorgan, Merthyr and Rhondda Cynon Taf. In her resource for primary schools, Primary Agenda, endorsed by Jeremy Miles, Professor Renold informs teachers that children have a right to a gender identity and she encourages children to question their gender. Her motivation for doing so is to queer childhood by dissolving the binary opposition between male and female. In this, she has been inspired by American academic Judith Butler, the author of a highly influential work, Gender Trouble. Renold writes, "The heteronormativity of gender relations in the early years is certainly ripe for some gender trouble, and some of this work is well underway and radically disrupting a range of gender and sexual truths in what might be more fittingly described as the heteroformative years." The answer to the question I asked, of course, is that Professor Renold, on behalf of the Welsh Government, has used queer theory and the work of Judith Butler in the development of their RSE guidance and code. And the meaning of the word gender has been changed. And gender will no longer be used as a synonym for sex in the teaching of children. In September 2021, Stonewall tweeted a quote from Judith Butler. "Politically, securing greater freedoms for women requires that we rethink the category of women to include those new possibilities. The historical meaning of gender can change as its norms are reenacted, refused, or recreated." Stonewall Cymru have significant influence with the Welsh Government. In response to a Freedom of Information request made by E. Williams in July 2020, the Welsh Government released minutes of meetings between Stonewall Cymru and Welsh Government officials. On 6th of July 2020, there was a transgender engagement meeting between the then Deputy Minister and Chief Whip, Jane Hutt, and the then Counsel General, Jeremy Miles. The minutes illuminate the extraordinary influence that Stonewall Cymru have had. Item 2 of the minutes stated, "The Deputy Minister and Chief Whip acknowledged that the Transgender Action Plan needed to be refreshed and that Stonewall Cymru are conducting engagement work to enable publication of a new plan by March 2021. The minutes of the meeting refer to young people with gender dysphoria as trans young people. There is no acknowledgement in these minutes that gender dysphoria is a mental health condition, nor any curiosity expressed about why so many young people are identifying as trans or non-binary." Item 14 of the minutes stated, "It was agreed that there were 3 key next steps which need to take place. Number 1, representation to UK government. 2, a statement of support issued on 9th of July. 3, a review of what Wales can do in terms of legislation and guidance. The statement of support included the mantra, trans women are women, trans men are men, and non-binary people are valid. Further minutes released as part of the Freedom of Information request demonstrated the Welsh Government asked Stonewall Cymru to submit a draft LGBTQ+ action plan. In January 2021, Kate Harris and Bev Jackson, the founders of the LGBT Alliance, wrote Jane Hutt, "Dear Deputy Minister, we are writing to ask you to join a non-partisan discussion on the LGBT+ action plan for Wales, due for release in 9 weeks' time. We believe this discussion is urgently needed since the action plan may have severely detrimental consequences for the protected characteristic of sexual orientation. We believe that the likely impending erosion of LGBT rights is not intentional. After all, the Welsh Government has undertaken to ensure that advancing equality for transgender and non-binary people will not erode the rights of women and other people with protected characteristics. This is an important and much appreciated aspiration, but complex to achieve. We would like to offer you our support in addressing these complexities. You have outsourced the job of developing the LGBT action plan to Stonewall Cymru. We are sure that you did so in good faith. After all, over the decades, Stonewall built up a reputation as the leading UK LGBT lobby group, whose reputation for fact-based argument and bridge building was second to none. Indeed, many of us in LGBT Alliance helped to build it up, and were proud to do so. When Stonewall changed its mission in 2015, becoming what can best be called a gender identity lobbying organisation, it kept the same name. This has understandably given rise to confusion. It would have been helpful if, at the time, Stonewall had renamed itself as Queer Trans Intersex People's Group, as this would make a clear statement of the group's priorities since 2015. It has been a heartbreaking blow for many of Stonewall's one-time LGBT supporters who feel the organisation has abandoned them. Today, Stonewall promotes a very narrow view of sex and gender and does not represent LGBT people as a whole. It insists that everyone has a gender identity that takes precedence over biological sex, and that anyone who challenges this doctrine is a bigot. This includes people who say that they're only attracted to others of the same sex. In other words, the very homosexuals whose interests Stonewall once held dear. It is a sorry state of affairs, almost incomprehensible to those hearing it for the first time. The letter also mentioned the Ciara Bell case. In June 2021, Madrigal Cymru published an article on their website that stated, "We believe that Welsh Government's over-reliance on Stonewall puts it in contravention of its public sector equality duty, which obliges public bodies to balance the rights of all the protected characteristics specified in the Equality Act 2010, and to foster good relations between the different groups. The disproportionate level of influence on policy development that the Welsh Government has afforded Stonewall is anti-democratic and is not compatible with the transparency, accountability and objectivity required by the Nolan Principles. These are 7 principles of public life that apply to anyone who works as a public office holder. The principles are selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty and leadership. Instead of engagement with gender-critical bodies, our democratically elected government parrot the Stonewall mantra of no debate." In April 2023, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, Victor Madrigal-Borloz, visited Wales. He tweeted, "The mission continued this Wednesday and Thursday in Cardiff, where I had the opportunity to hold a work session with Welsh policy officers, brief Deputy Minister Blythin and meet with an array of civil society representatives working with local LGBT communities. Madrigal-Borloz met with Lisa Power, Kate Hutchinson, Sophie Quinney and Kate Nambiar from the Welsh Gender Service and Davinia Green from Stonewall Cymru. At the end of his visit to the UK, an end of mission statement was produced. In the statement, Madrigal-Borloz wrote, "As an example of good practice in human rights policy making, the Welsh Government published in February 2023 an ambitious LGBTQ+ action plan prepared in partnership with CSO stakeholders and through a consultation that received over 1,300 inputs, with a view of making Wales the most LGBTQ+ friendly nation in Europe." This statement was highlighted in a press release issued by the Welsh Government. Madrigal-Borloz also stated, "Those human rights-based public policy-making efforts are part of the comprehensive and inclusive RSC and health education platform in the LGBTQ+ action plan and the HIV action plan of the Welsh Government, which it presented to the independent expert as good practice. Welsh authorities indicated that some groups opposed to LGBT-inclusive RSC in certain localities had spread misinformation about RSE campaigns aimed at creating anxiety in the public, such that the Ministry of Education was redoubling its efforts to produce strong educational campaign materials to counter that misinformation and correct the record on constructive efforts to discuss healthy relationships. Those strong campaign materials will be interesting to read." In September 2021, Madrigal-Borloz was the guest speaker in a Gender Theory in Practice workshop. Stonewall, the Welsh Government RSE Code and Guidance, and the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, Victor Madrigal-Borloz, have all been influenced by the queer theory of Judith Butler and the political goal of dissolving the gender binary. Stonewall insistently, persistently and consistently pushed the lie that gender identity is a protected characteristic because gender identity is required to dissolve the binary opposition between male and female. As former CEO Nancy Kelly states.
So the Equality Act protects on the basis of both sex and gender identity.
They are all invested in changing language with the goal of undermining heteronormativity, part of a sort of Masonic club, a cognoscenti that aims to change discourse in order to manipulate the psychology of ordinary people. Welsh Government ministers are either extremely naive or they are complicit in the psychological manipulation of minds. Madrigal-Borloz, whose end of mission statement the Welsh Government enthusiastically publicised, has stated, "Gender is not something that is inherent to persons. There is no evidence to that effect. Gender is, in fact, the relationship between the person's free will and the series of stereotypes that assign behaviours or patterns or roles to a particular given sex, or to the understanding of sex in a given society." The response to my letter to Jeremy Miles contained this paragraph. RSE has an important safeguarding role and helps ensure that all learners can see themselves, their families, their communities and each other reflected across the curriculum and can learn to value difference and diversity as a source of strength. The Welsh Government approach to child safeguarding appears to be, number one, encourage children to identify as a gender based on social stereotypes. Number two, affirm the gender that they identify as. The danger of this approach is blindingly obvious, and it will not benefit children. Both Stonewall and Victor Madrigal-Borloz have received substantial money from the Arcus Foundation, the philanthropic arm of a multi-billion-dollar medical corporation. Those parents who would prefer that the Welsh Government did not change the definition of words on the say-so of an American academic may wish to support Public Child Protection Wales. Links are included below.